The press room in Brussels fills with a familiar hum. Quiet footsteps, muted conversations, the light shuffle of papers, and the distant clicks of camera shutters. The atmosphere here is measured, professional, and expectant. At the centre of the room, a podium stands before a wall of flags, the European Union's circle of gold stars reflected across the polished surfaces of camera lenses. A door opens. French President Emmanuel Macron steps inside, moving with a practiced calm. He acknowledges the audience with a slight nod, taking his place at the lectern. For months, discussions surrounding the EU-Mercosur trade agreement have raised questions, stirred debate, and reignited long-standing tensions in European agricultural, environmental, and industrial sectors. Today, Macron seeks to reiterate where France stands and what remains unresolved. He begins with clarity and emphasis. France, he says, is waiting for the European Commission to finalise its work on the trade agreement with Mercosur, the South American trade bloc that includes Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay and Paraguay. The message is both firm and cautious. France is not rejecting the deal. France is not rushing it forward. France is demanding guarantees. Macron reminds the audience that France has insisted on safeguard clauses, mechanisms designed to protect European farmers and industries in case of market disruption. He explains that customs controls must be strengthened, particularly when it comes to agricultural imports from abroad. Food quality, safety standards and environmental regulations, he says, cannot become the silent casualties of free trade enthusiasm. The images show him speaking calmly, articulating each point with the confidence of a leader who knows his position is watched by farmers in rural France, diplomats in Brussels, and negotiators across the Atlantic. He switches briefly into French, reinforcing the delicate balance his government seeks. On one hand, France must remain an active, constructive player in global trade. On the other, it must ensure the people who feed the nation, the livestock farmers, the producers, the agricultural workers, are not sacrificed to agreements that privilege imported products with lower production standards. When he speaks of livestock farming support, the room listens closely. This is not only policy, it is political survival in a country where agricultural identity runs deep. Macron turns next to a broader European concern, the climate. In recent years, environmental commitments have become central to Europe's self-definition. The EU sees itself not merely as a trading power, but as a global climate leader. Thus, any agreement, including the one with Mercosur, must align with ecological responsibility. Macron stresses that the agreement must not undermine global emissions reduction goals or weaken European efforts to push for sustainable production practices worldwide. He then shifts to another topic closely tied to competitiveness and the future of European industry, the 2035 target for phasing out traditional combustion vehicles. Macron notes that Europe has collectively set the year 2035 as the turning point, the moment when new cars sold in the EU are expected to be zero emission. This target, he argues, is not merely symbolic. It provides long-term direction to manufacturers, researchers, investors and consumers. Without such a fixed reference point, industries lose confidence, innovation slows, and financial risk rises. He speaks plainly. If Europe abandons the 2035 goal, then the development of European electric battery factories will collapse. The room absorbs the weight of the statement. Factories are more than production sites. They are jobs, communities, supply chains, and geopolitical leverage. Without its own battery production, Europe risks dependency, not on oil, but on foreign battery supply controlled by states whose priorities may diverge from its own. The camera captures Macron listening to a question. His expression is steady. Brussels, he says, is where he presides. The government governs, Parliament legislates. Each branch must act within its role, and decisions must reflect only one overriding principle, the best interest of the country. He refers indirectly to domestic tensions, specifically the government's recent suspension of pension reforms. He does not dwell on conflict. Instead, he emphasises coordination, duty, and the continuity of institutions. As the press conference continues, the context becomes clearer. This moment is not only about the Mercosur deal, it is about Europe's future posture in a world defined by shifting trade routes, resurgent nationalism, global supply chain pressure, climate urgency, and technological competition. Behind the diplomatic language are practical realities. The EU-Mercosur agreement has been in negotiation for more than 2 decades. For its supporters, it promises increased trade, stronger ties between Europe and South America, and a strategic counterweight to global powers seeking influence in those same regions. For its critics, particularly in France, it represents a threat to local agriculture and an invitation to uneven environmental enforcement, especially concerning deforestation in the Amazon. Macron's remarks balance these tensions. He acknowledges the promise of the agreement, a gateway to new markets, deeper global partnerships and opportunities for European exporters. Yet he insists that Europe cannot compromise on its environmental and social values. Trade, he suggests, must not become a race to the bottom, but a coordinated rise to shared standards. The camera angle shifts subtly. A closer shot now, showing Macron's face as he listens, thinking, responding carefully. Every phrase reflects both negotiation and the weight of public expectation. The message is not only for Europe, it is also for Brazil, where agricultural expansion has collided with environmental activism. It is for Argentina, balancing diplomatic interest with economic pressures. It is for Uruguay and Paraguay, seeking more stable access to export markets. And it is for European farmers who have protested trade agreements they believe threaten their livelihoods. As Macron continues, the tone deepens. Trade policy is not an isolated subject. It is linked to sovereignty, economic, environmental and political. A Europe that cannot control the standards of what enters its markets is a Europe vulnerable to external pressures. Sovereignty is not isolationism, he implies. It is the capacity to engage globally without surrendering internal protections. Later, Macron addresses competitiveness again. Modern industry requires predictability, a stable horizon for planning decisions that could last decades. Whether building a factory, electrifying a transportation network, or transitioning to renewable energy, companies need to know that policies will not shift unpredictably. If the EU retreats from its 2035 target, the credibility of European policymaking collapses. Investors look elsewhere, innovation slows. The very industries meant to guide Europe into the next era could migrate to other regions, Asia, North America, or elsewhere, where policy direction seems more committed. To Macron, the question is not merely about environmental regulations. It is about the economic architecture of Europe's next century. He makes clear that Europe must act with unity. Member states must avoid fragmentations, the return of protectionist reflexes, nationalist rivalries, or disjointed industrial policies. Competitiveness, sovereignty, and climate objectives, he says, must align, not compete. He speaks of responsibility. Every institution, every minister, every legislative body must consider not only immediate pressures, but long-term national interest. The emphasis remains steady. The country must come first. Toward the end of the press conference, Macron reiterates gratitude toward the European Commission for respecting France's conditions during the ongoing negotiations. The point is subtle but significant. He acknowledges cooperation. He signals that France is not obstructing progress but participating constructively. This matters both diplomatically and publicly. Finally, the moment comes when the press conference concludes. Macron steps back from the podium. The cameras follow as he begins to leave the room. The atmosphere returns to its earlier quiet hum, but the words spoken linger. The trade agreement remains unfinished. The debates remain alive. The decisions ahead remain complex. Yet the direction is clearer. France will not sign a deal lacking guarantees. Europe must maintain climate leadership. And the shift toward electric mobility, industrial independence, and sustainable competitiveness remains non-negotiable. The room slowly empties. The conversation, however, continues across capitals, negotiations, and public discourse, shaping the next chapter of Europe's economic strategy and its place in a changing world.